greatest ironies in archaeology. So 1872, George Smith learns that there's an older version of the flood in Tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic. But why it was so ironic is by showing that Noah's flood wasn't literally true, it preserved the possibility that the flood story itself was based on a historic event. It was a regional flood in southern Mesopotamia, destroyed the world of the Babylonians or the Sumerians, and then it was passed on in word of mouth and recorded in an aggrandized form as the Noah's flood story of Genesis. So it's Matu Gor 8. Literally, the Gor 8 sign stands for the word flood. It starts to make some sense from Mesopotamian thinking. So you got this field constellation, the quintessential field, right? It's this square, right? To the east of it is the hired worker constellation and his plow. He's emulating the divine work of plowing the field. So there's your other arc, when you look at it, is floating on the floodwaters. Northern fish in astrological text is called the Tigris River, and the southern Pisces fish is referred to as the Euphrates. So you have a guy named Resting, or Noah, standing at the mouth of the river's constellation in the body of Aries.
And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm back with John McHugh. And last two times you were here, we got a great response from the crowd. And yeah, today we're talking about Noah's Ark. But first, tell us about your book that's out there. Where to find it?
Yeah, so the book's called The Celestial Code of Scripture, and the subtitle is the astral cipher underlying the miracle stories of the Bible and Qur'an. And what it basically shows is many of the iconic miracles that you read about in the Bible and the Qur'an are actually, they actually conform to pictures in pre-Christian, pre-Jewish, and pre-Islamic Mesopotamian star atlases. And so, for instance, there's a picture of a guy walking on water, a deity walking on water. And when you look at his cuneiform title, you get the term anointed one, Christ. So you see virgin birth can be traced to there's a manger up there, a Christ child, a pregnant virgin. And all of these iconic miracles can be found in pagan astrological tablets. And that's what the book's about. One chapter focuses on Noah's celestial flood. And I was hoping, Neil, in this episode, if we could just, you're not going to believe this, but I'm going to show your viewers where Noah's Ark is. And you can go see it for yourself. I swear to God, I'm not messing with you.
Well, I'll take your word for it. Let's do it.
All right. So, so there's the book title. And again, I'm going to just, I'm going off my clicker here. So, so it's the Celestial Code of Scripture, and that's it. And then, so the book is exactly that. And many of the iconic miracles reported in the Bible and the Qur'an correspond to pictures in far older Mesopotamian star atlases. And it comes from the idea that the constellations depicted celestial writing. They were kind of heavenly writing. And that the astronomer and astrologer's title was a writer. And although they were the timekeepers and they did predict the future, they also did a kind of astrology in reverse. They looked at pictures in the stars to explain the monumental events that occurred in the past. And whatever they saw in that picture, they wrote down, regardless of whether it conformed to the laws of nature. That's where miracles come from. They come from the idea, like the Our Father, on earth as it is in heaven. You're bringing down the heavens to earth. That's our goal, right? That's what one born and raised as a Christian. I was raised devoutly Roman Catholic. That's the goal, and you're trying to emulate what you see in the stars. So most of your viewers can comprehend that. When you look up at the 48 ancient constellations, if you have some amateur astronomers in the audience, you know that, you look at that picture of the sky right there. A friend of mine drew that. You see Ketis, the sea serpent, at the bottom of the page. You see Andromeda in the center. She's chained to a rock. Ketis, she's being sacrificed to Ketis. You see Perseus there carrying the head of Medusa. You see a flying horse, Pegasus. These are miracles. I mean, these beasts never existed on Earth, but if you were a devout Greek pagan or a Roman pagan, you would believe that these stories were 100% true because you could prove it. They're visible in heaven. These are deities in heaven. And in fact, if you go further, I'm not going to go into it much in this episode, but in Mesopotamian, cuneiform text, they refer to what we would call, I like the word polysemy because it means multiple meanings in a word and phrase. We call it wordplay. If you find a wordplay, you found a revelation from the gods. And they actually had a kind of writing called constellation writing, and that's what that's based on. So the book, Celestial Code of Scripture, it explains that the miracles can be traced to a picture in the stars. Then when you look at the cuneiform spelling of the constellations that make up that picture, they mean more than one word. When you write down all the words, you get the Jewish miracle, you get the Christian miracle, you get a Garden in Eden, you get Noah's flood, you get a strong man named Little Son or Samson who kills 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. And that's the jawbone of Taurus, because the alternate reading for Taurus is donkey. It's the jawbone of a donkey constellation. Anyway, that's what the whole the book is about. And I argue in the book that Jewish, Christian, and Islamic authors translated these stellar picture stories into narratives that were attributed to historic personages. So there may have been a real Samson, and there may have been a real Jonah, and there may have been a real Jesus, but the miracles they did were based on what they saw in the heavens. And that's where the confusion starts to occur. So if you said, like, who are these astrologer authors? Well, on the right is Berosus. He's a Babylonian astrologer. He wrote the Babylonicae in about 281 BC. He's an astrologer, and he writes about this Sumerian king last. He writes about the flood. The most common astrologer author, of course, is Daniel, from the book of Daniel. He's literally taken by Nebuchadnezzar II, and he rises up to become the head of all of the magicians in Babylonia, including the astrologers. So chapter 8 from the Celestial Code of Scripture is called Rediscovering Noah's Flood. But I thought we could really have some fun with it on this one. In the book, I just show that the flood god, the flood waters, the ark, the flood hero, the mountains, the birds that are released by the flood hero, the olive sprig, the burning altar, the rainbow, and then the oven. Because in the Qur'an, the flood waters come out of an oven. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a little later. But all of these conform to constellations in Mesopotamian star atlases, and sometimes Greek and Roman. For instance, there's a picture right there. The Argo is a ship constellation. In a few moments, I'm going to show you it's the earliest flood boat. The title for Argo has the word dove embedded in it. To the west of Argo is a bow and arrow constellation. That's what Canis Major is in Mesopotamia. Well, the rainbow that God puts in the sky after Noah's flood, it's a kasheth. It's an archer's bow. And there's an archer's bow in the constellations. Remember the ark grounds on Mount Ararat? Well, there's a mountain constellation in the stars. Gemini, the twins in Mesopotamia, are twin mountains. Another place you can find a dove, the Pleiades are turned into doves in ancient Greek texts in celestial mythology. And the raven comes straight out of Mesopotamia. It's Corvus. So anyway, that's what my master's thesis was on years and years ago, and that's what one of the chapters from the Celestial Code is about. But I thought we could focus on this, rediscovering Noah's Ark in the stars. And I know that sounds flippant and it sounds like I'm joking, but I'm dead serious. I'm going to show you where Noah's Ark is, and you can go see it for yourself. So when you think of an overview of the Noah's flood story and the quest for Noah's Ark, I'm just going to give you the truncated, abridged version of it. But you get this quaint story, right? All the animals come to the ark 2 by 2. And when you still believe in Santa Claus, this is your favorite story. It's an amazing story. How could you not love it, right? All these cute little zebra and giraffes and ibexes and lions,
They're all just staying in line perfectly. No one's eating each other.
Yeah, exactly. and from its inception into the book of Genesis, it gets written down around 500. I'm trying to not cause an argument here. Some people would say a little earlier than that. Some people would say a little later than that. 500, nobody's going to have a conniption over. So that's what I wrote down. That's about when it gets actually penned. And it's recorded as a direct history. Genesis, of course, verses chapter 6 through chapter 8. It's in the book of Genesis. You see it as a historic event in Isaiah 54:9. And this psalmist actually writes in 29:10, writes, Yahweh sits at the flood. And that's going to have a lot of meaning a little later in this presentation. So you go into the New Testament, and Jesus avows that the Noah's flood story was 100% accurate in Matthew and Luke's gospel, and those passages I have listed there. So everything was going great. Flood's a historic event starting in 500 BC. Jews believe it. The Christians believe it. And it goes pretty well through the Middle Ages until you hit the age of exploration. Then you have sailors and sea captains going to Australia, South America, North America. And then now they got to explain how, like an Australian kangaroo, how an American bison, and how a South American tree sloth managed to crawl and walk thousands of miles, swim thousands of miles until they get to the ark. And then they got to do it all over again. And at that point, even it just brings up so many questions, the whole litany of, how do you jam 2 million animal species onto an ark whose perimeter is not much bigger than a soccer field? How do you feed them, dispose of their waste? Where do you put the food? How do you keep predator and prey species separated? If one lion eats one zebra, they're extinct.
Right.
So, and then there's the hydrological studies that were even in that time in the 17 and 1800s showing that there wasn't enough water to cover the mountains on Earth. There just isn't enough water.
Right.
And the magic question is, even if there was, just say for some reason there was enough water to cover every mountain on the planet, including Everest.
It would be doing it right now.
Yeah. Where did the waters go? Where did they drain off into? That's the magic question. So what happened was, and then it got even further impugned with Darwin's Origin of the Species, showing that human beings are and every animal is descended from an evolved earlier species, which showed that, and geologists were proving this too, that the Earth was very, very old. They didn't know how old, but it was much older than the 6,000 years of Genesis. So you got to give these guys credit. There were a group of theologians in the late 1800s who were science-minded theologians. And they came to the conclusion, and I'm just quoting Samuel Rolls Dreyer here. He says, we're forced consequently to the conclusion that the flood, as described by the biblical writers, is unhistorical. And again, it makes sense. And then for me, it's one of the most greatest ironies in archaeology. So 1872, George Smith, the linguist, learns that there's an older version of the flood in tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic.
The reason why this is so profound, people don't realize this, because we're all in 2022 world. We don't even realize this. When people think that when when Noah's flood story was told or written for the first time, that they knew about, that people were already aware of this Mesopotamian flood story. This got discovered recently,
Yeah.
a few centuries ago.
Yeah.
And so that it is such a big deal when you actually put it in perspective, that they rediscovered the original form of this flood story. But go
Yeah.
ahead.
And as you say, and I was very lucky. I was taught. I was from a Catholic orphanage in West Philadelphia, and I was adopted by devout Irish Roman Catholics. You know, like you learn that like Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine when you're Irish Catholic. So anyway, these nuns said that the flood story of Noah can't be a global flood. They were honest about their teaching, and I do appreciate that. And uh, it really whet my appetite for biblical studies. But why it was so ironic is by showing that Noah's flood wasn't literally true, it preserved the possibility that the flood story itself was based on a historic event. Okay, and that's the great irony to me. So all of a sudden, people were saying like the new rationale was, well, it was a regional flood in southern Mesopotamia, destroyed the world of the Babylonians or the Sumerians, and then it was passed on in word of mouth and recorded in an aggrandized form as the Noah's flood story of Genesis. So what's interesting about that is they're relying a lot on word of mouth, oral tradition. And I'll get to the point about that. So this is a picture. I think this is from Ur. One of the scholars that said they actually found a flood layer was Sir Leonard Woolley. He thought he found the flood layer, found 8 feet of silt in the city of Ur in southern Mesopotamia. And he said, "Oh, that's the flood layer." And that's the new rationale. Everybody basically, once a decade, another book comes out on Noah's flood saying it was this catastrophic flood that spawned the Mesopotamian flood story. But I want to continue with that earlier idea that the flood was historic. So you got St. Jacob of Nisibis in Syria. So he actually climbed Mount Ararat in the early 4th century. He said he was confronted by an angel. He said he wanted a relic from the ark, and the angel gives him a hunk of wood. And he notices that the wood looks like it's been chopped with an axe. So apparently the angel needs to use an axe, or it was Noah that chopped it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So no, this is, and again, there are still monasteries in Armenia and around Mount Ararat that claim to have wood. This crucifix supposedly has wood from Noah's Ark, right, in its center inlay. And then there was this guy Fernand Navarra who claimed to have climbed Mount Ararat and found cut wood. And this is a photo from 1955. There's the 1960 Time aerial photo of this geologic formation on Mount Ararat that they swore was, Noah's Ark. It eventually segued into, when I was a kid in like 5th grade, this movie came out, In Search of Noah's Ark. It was supposedly a documentary, and it was a book. I saw this movie like 5 times. I was really interested in it. The idea that you could actually find this relic, right? Well, you look at this picture I have right there. It's a painting from the late 1800s of Noah leaving the ark in Mount Ararat. And you can see all the animals following in groups of 2. And early Christians in late antiquity, we're talking 200s, 300s, 400s, 500s, and in the beginning of the early Middle Ages, they thought Ararat was hallowed ground. So there were many Hermitic monks who were living prayerful lives of solitude on its slopes. And what they, it's very likely they the point is they brought a lot of wood up with them to build their shelters and to keep warm. So they were cutting a lot of wood. And the C14 dates of Navarra he let it, at least he was honest, he let that hunk of wood be radiocarbon dated, and they all fell between 260 and 790. That would suggest it's those hermits that were living on Ararat.
Well, you know what? Want to hear something crazy? in book 1 of Josephus' Antiquities,
Mhm.
he says that on Mount Ararat, people found wood of the ark. So
Mm,
this sort of historicity argument was already happening in the first century.
yeah.
People were already doubting it, and people like Josephus were already apologizing for it and saying, "Well, they found a piece of wood." That's what he says in
Yep.
here. They
Yeah.
found a piece of wood.
And it's been chopped with an axe.
I think he said something like that too. Yeah.
They didn't have C14 dating then.
No,
That's the
still,
problem.
it's funny because it shows you that already before the New Testament's even written, people are already like, "Well, what do you mean there's an ark up there?" Well,
Yeah.
they found some wood.
Yeah.
That's like it's funny how they were that conversation was already happening.
Yeah. It starts with the belief.
Yeah,
And then you just find information to fill in the belief.
exactly.
So it's like this kind of transfers into the question, like, so where does the origin of Noah's flood, where does it begin? Where did this story begin? And your guest treated this, I guess it was a couple months ago, 3 months ago when they were on. They handled the possibility of Noah's flood, and they showed how it's just impossible.
It's literally
The idea of a global flood is absolutely, a third grader today knows that it's not possible just by posing basic questions. But the flood shows up almost nowhere, out of nowhere, in Mesopotamia in the middle of the 21st century BC. And uh, this is interesting because what you have is you have the Sumerians. They invent writing about 3000 BC. So if they experienced this catastrophic flood, they didn't write about it for almost 1,000 years. And it's very unlikely because you got this, one of the foremost Sumerologists of our time is Miguel Seville. He writes that the theme of a flood which destroys mankind does not seem to belong in the main body of Sumerian traditions. Allusions to it are lacking in the texts which are presumed to go back to the older originals and so best represent Sumerian literary themes. Put simply, the flood story is not part of the Sumerian literary corpus. It's just not part of that body. Then the Sumerian king list shows up. And in about 2050 BC, you get your first reference to the flood out of the blue. And that's where it starts to get real. And this is, I think I really want to share this with your viewers because I think they're going to find this fascinating. So the flood story, the original Sumerian king list could have started with a flood and then had post-Diluvian kings. The antediluvian section was inserted later. Nonetheless, the antediluvian section, the kings that reigned before the flood, there's 8 of them. They reigned for 241,200 years. And to put that in perspective, that's when our Neanderthal ancestors and even Homo erectus, the man ape Homo erectus, is still running around on Earth.
Wow.
And you look at the titles. So you have the first king is Alulim. His name literally means horn of the stag. He's ruling for almost 30,000 years. Al-Lalgar, Shur of the Abzu. Lalgar is just a synonym for Abzu. Reigns 36,000 years. The N part, when you say that N, it's just an honorific. It means Lord, but it's like Mr., Mrs., Reverend, Doctor. The guy's name is Mainluana, literally the crown of the man of the sky. And you look at the next king, Main Galana, the great crown of the sky. Then you find the next king,
I can't help but to think of Plato when in Plato's Republic, where he talks about you want your civilization to think that you have a divine society whose rulership goes back thousands of years to the gods, and like you almost got to wonder if if the Greeks are learning this from maybe the Hittites who learned this from going back to the Sumerians, like this information, this sort of like noble lie, the sort of like make ourselves look so strong and good that nobody will ever cross us. Yeah. Everyone will do what they're told, right?
Yeah, and what I want to add to that, Neil, is today we would think of it as a noble lie, but you got to remember as I'm going to show you in a few moments, you're going to see that 7 of these 8 kings are constellations.
Right.
So if you can trace it into the stars, yeah, we are descended from a god. How do you know? I can prove it. It's right there. Look up in the stars.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So today we know that that's not possible and that's silly. But in archaic times, that's how you proved your past.
Of course. Yeah.
So you got the god, Deemdir just means God, deity. The deity Dumuzi, the faithful sun deity. I'll show you in a second. Sipaziana means the faithful shepherd of the sky. Main Durana is just the crown of the bond of the sky. And Ubar Tutu is a tough one to translate. That one, you'll see I cannot connect with a constellation yet. But all this, right after those 8 kings, you get the first 2 sentences, this reference to the flood. And this is what it says. The flood swept there over. After the flood swept, therefore, when the kingship was lowered from the sky, the kingship was in the city of Kish. Okay? What caught my eye about that antediluvian list, the pre-flood list of kings, is Lulim's a constellation. So Alulim is it's the stag constellation. Alulim is the antler of the stag, the antler of Andromeda, which was a stag constellation. Al-Lalgar can be translated as Shur of the Abzu. It's the celestial sea of the wet region of the night sky. Main Luana, crown of the man of the sky, that's the Hyades. It's a crown constellation. Main Galana, another great crown constellation. It's the Hyades. The Muzi is unequivocally equated with Orion.
Wow.
Sipaziana is the astronomical, that's like in the astronomical text. Like, what month is it going to be? Well, Sipaziana is going to rise at this time. It's Orion. And again, Main Dorana. Main means crown. Dor means bond. Ana means of the skies. So Alulim is probably the antlers of Andromeda, the stag constellation. So I put a few arrows in there. So here's the wet region of the night sky. This is the Abzu. Notice on the right, you'll see a goatfish. These are all our modern watery constellations. The dolphin, southern fish, the water god, which is Aquarius, the twin fishes, the sea serpent, the river, and the ship Argo, right? So they go back into Mesopotamian times. But if you look at right in the middle, you'll see the bull constellation. And you'll notice there's a crown there, or a tiara. And there's a little line going up to Main Luana, Main Gal Ana, and Main Dor Ana. Main just means crown, and it's some variation of crown. There's a crown constellation in the sky. It's in the face of the bull. It's the Hyades asterism in the bull constellation. And then I have another little arrow there to the Muzi and Sipaziana, who are embodied in Orion. And Al-Lalgar just means shore of the Abzu. I didn't know where to put that arrow. It could be anywhere that's the shore of this Abzu, this celestial sea. It's in the night sky. So you might say, well, how did you get 2 or 3 deities in one constellation? Well, sort of like the Trinity. There's God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. So you have to understand ancient people's conceptualization of the heavens. The constellations were the lowest heavens. Most of the deities, almost all the deities, lived in the middle heavens, and then the upper heavens were the realm of Anu, the sky god. And various deities could come down and manifest themselves to human beings through the constellations. That's why you get more than one deity showing up in one constellation. It's an archaic concept of heaven. So, and that's why in the lower heavens there, I drew the zodiac. Well, I didn't. My wonderful editor, Elizabeth Hardy, drew the zodiac there.
Nice.
So you got the highest heavens. By the way, this is where you read about the Judeo-Christian God being in the highest heavens. It's Shemei HaShemayim. It just means it's the highest heavens. It's from that concept that there are layers of heaven, and Elohim, gods, that's what the Hebrew word for God is. It's plural. Embodies the highest heavens. So where did this catastrophic flood come from? Where does this idea come from? Well, it's embedded in that same picture. The word for crown, you see that little yellow arrow I have there? It's agu. It means crown. That's what it's called in cuneiform star atlases. However, the same word means devastating flood. It's a homonym. It's not even a homophone. It's spelled exactly the same way. And this may be the idea of where a flood came from. Remember, archaic peoples were looking at the stars as a pictographic storybook of history, if you will. And there's a flood there. So you might say, well, that's interesting. Flood waters. Well, geez, wouldn't the flood boat be up there? Well, again, before we get to that, we got to go back to the king list. Remember, it's mentioned 2 sentences, terse sentences. There's no story, no flood god, no ark, no flood hero, no mountain, no bird release theme, no olive sprig, no rainbow, no burning altar, and no oven. And then about 300 years later, even more than that, a little over 300 years later, you have the tale of Artrahisis, the oldest flood story. It's around 1700 BC, 17th century BC. Then you get a global 7-day flood. You get a flood god. It's Enki or Ea, depending on which the Sumerian or the Akkadian version of the name. Then you get a flood hero, you get a flood boat, and you get a denouement. You get sort of a leitmotif, and this kind of climax occurs, But the deity that causes the flood isn't some hypothetical entity. It's Aquarius. Enki and cuneiform star atlases literally call Ea the deities embodied in Aquarius. That's what they call Aquarius. The Sumerian title is Enki. So when you go back to that celestial sea, you have a flood, and if you look on the right of the screen, you'll see Enki Ea embodied on a throne in Aquarius. So Ea literally lives in the Abzu. It says it over and over and over again. He's underwater, living in an Abzu, because he's the water god. And I believe this is where the origin of the flood story comes from. It comes from a stellar picture of the flood, where the wet region of the night sky is viewed as the scene of a devastating flood that was caused by the water god Enki Ea.
Wow.
So anyway, so you go to the Artrahisis tale. After the flood, there's a bunch of breaks in it, so this section's tough to read, but this part's not. Flood waters, flood ends, you get that line right there, and it literally says the warrior god Enlil, who's embodied in Boetes, saw the Makuru boat. So it's not just a boat. In Artrahisis, the flood boat is a specific kind of boat. It's a Makuru boat in Akkadian. Well, what's the Makuru boat? Well, it's the original flood boat. In Akkadian, it's spelled Makuru. In Sumerian, I put the Sumerian in capitals because I'm going to write it as a Sumerian logogram. It's Magor, right? And you're like, well, that's what it looks like. Has a towering prow and stern, usually made of wood. And when you look at the cuneiform signs, you find out that cuneiform scholars, there's a whole bunch of Ma signs and a whole bunch of Gor signs. You got to put little numbers after them so you know which one you're talking about. So it's Ma 2, Gor 8. Literally, the Gor 8 sign stands for the word flood. So this is literally the flood boat. And star atlases refer to it as a constellation in the southern region of the night sky. So all of a sudden, we have the deity who creates the flood is a constellation, and the original ark is a constellation. And if you're not certain about that, you could just read the title, which says flood boat. I'm Polish. I'm going with that. You know what I mean? So anyway, so you have this, so the Magor's a deity. And by the way, they also refer to it as a deity. So it's a divine ship. Mm-hmm. It's in the southern region of the night sky. And in the Gilgamesh and Aga myth, a Magor boat gets its prow chopped off. Mm-hmm. So when you line up all that data, you have a boat deity. Its name is Flood Boat. It's the flood hero's ark. Constellation, southern region of the night sky, gets its bow chopped off. Are there any boats?
Oh, that happens in Jason and Argonautica as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. That's their explanation. Actually, they talk about the stern getting cut off of the Argo, which is not how it appears in astronomy. Wow. So is there a divine boat in the southern sky that has its prow torn off? Yeah, the Argo is. it's a deified ship constellation in the southern region of the night sky, and it doesn't have a bow.
We didn't even plan that. I didn't even not know you were about to talk about that hour ago. I just said that.
And I was like, I mean,
so funny.
I want to know. I really am playing paleopsychologist. I want to know why you wrote those words. Like, why did you say that? That's what matters to me.
Yep.
So the thing that's really funny, and this may kind of interest your viewers, is so the Magor, that Sumerian term for this constellation, it depicts a stern. After the Gilgamesh and Aga myth, the bow gets chopped off. So the word for stern in Akkadian is arku. And when you translate arku into Greek, you get argu, which is argo. So just so you know, like, I'm just going to give you a little linguistic lesson here. So like g and k. And you say, if you put your hand up to your mouth, you go g, and you say k. You'll notice your mouth, lips, and tongue do all the same thing. G, you hold the air in. K, you blow the air out. And that's why G's and K's flip around all the time when they get borrowed into and out of languages, like Hammurabi and Hammurabi. You get these B, and they're called bilabial shifts. In this case, it's a guttural shift. So I just thought, if your viewers wanted to ever see the Argo, so on November 1st, so it's Halloween, right? Go out at about 6 o'clock in the morning, face directly south at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you'll see stars just below the Great Dog constellation, Canis Major. Those stars, I'm at 40 degrees north latitude in Salt Lake City, so those stars are, they're the Argo. So if you wanted to see the original flood boat, there it is. But wanted to point something now is there's also a variant form of that flood boat, and it's a vessel whose sides are the same. So they're literally talking about another form of the ark is a floating cube, which doesn't even make any sense. That's insane, So you see it best in tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic. That's the tablet that has the flood story. So Ea Aquarius says to the flood hero Utnapishtim, his name's Artrahisis in the oldest version of the flood story, and in the Gilgamesh epic version, his name's Utnapishtim, which means he who saw life, is basically probably the best way to translate it. So this is Aquarius. This is Ea Aquarius talking. The boat you're going to build, her dimensions should all correspond. Her breadth and length should be the same. So then he goes on to say its perimeter should be in the shape of an ash-iku. Oh, literally, it means one field. The equivalent we have today would be an acre. It's a unit of surface area. I'm showing you a picture from the calendar of Dendera in Egypt. There it is. There's the Iku. It's a field. It's literally one field, but it's also a constellation, and it's also the prototype for another kind of flood boat, the ark, the box-shaped ark, which will show up again in Genesis, and I'll show that in a minute. The stars and the bodies are the Pegasus square. So that's not a very good view of the square. It makes it look like it's a trapezoid, but the Aku constellation is the square of Pegasus. Just so you know, that's south. South is at the top of your screen. North is at the bottom. I didn't want to make the horse always shows up upside down, but I didn't want to confuse your viewers in case you weren't astronomers. So,
and by the way, in the Deucalion, in Hesiod's version, which is told before Noah's flood, by the way, people don't realize it. This is older than Noah's flood. Hesiod's version, he calls it a chest, which is why it's square. He says that Deucalion, who's the son of Prometheus, is told by Prometheus to build a chest for him and his wife. No animals, just him and his wife, and it's Zeus who causes the flood.
Right, and isn't that Lucian's version of the flood story from her? There's a late one from Syria from like the 2nd or 3rd century, but
it's probably just a retelling. But Hesiod's the first one to tell that.
Okay, I didn't realize that. It's interesting. The Aku constellation, because of its shape, is also a cuneiform word for box or chest.
Yeah,
it's the name.
Chest.
So when you put this up in the sky, it starts to make some sense in Mesopotamian thinking. So you got this field constellation, the quintessential field, right? It's this square, right? To the east of it is the hired worker constellation and his plow. He's emulating the divine work of plowing the field, and the irrigation that that Aquarius kind of brings upon the earth, because it's irrigation that makes all the fields grow, proper amounts of irrigation that allow Mesopotamia to be so fertile. So that's how it looks in the sky, Aquarius, and it's just south of the field constellation. So I'm putting that back in the sky. So there's your other arc, when you look at it, is floating on the floodwaters, just a little bit north of Aquarius. And the Pegasus square is often described as the limits of the Abzu, which would make sense if it's floating on the surface of these waters. So if you were wondering how Ea, the water god embodied in Aquarius, could somehow be transformed into Yahweh, well, one of his epithets is Edim. It just means spring, as in like waters that come out of a spring. And you can also read that sign May, and May is a Sumerian verb of being, and it can translate as a future tense. It can mean he will be, and that's what Yahweh means, he will be. So you're wondering how Ea may have been thought of as, corresponding to Yahweh. There it is right there. I just wanted to show your audience that. So when we think of Noah's Ark, again, the word for Noah's Ark is, in Archaic Hebrew, it would have been today it's Teba or Teva, but that ah sound at the end would have been a T in Archaic Hebrew. So it would have been Tebat. And if you were writing this box constellation, there are many ways to write the word box. One of them is with the cuneiform sign P. You would just say, you could, Mul means constellation, but it's written with a cuneiform sign named Te, like the way we call the letter A. So sometimes they use the sign name, sometimes they use the actual pronunciation of the cuneiform sign. But if you were writing the constellation box, you could write it Te, and then you'd write P, which means box. But an alternate reading of that sign is Bot. So you get Tebat. And Tebat, literally, constellation box, is literally what the name of the ark is, the biblical ark. In biblical Hebrew, that bottom line there, Tebat, is literally the name of the ark. It just means box or chest. So my argument is they're just recycling this celestial flood story and celestial ark into Genesis. And if you want to ever find the ark, I just figured, what the heck, in case your viewers were interested, just go out on 4:30 in the morning on July 30th, and just face directly south and look up, and you'll, about the middle of the sky, if you're at 40 degrees latitude, you'll see this square in the sky, and that's the Pegasus square, which is Noah's Ark. So my favorite part of the flood story is the Quranic version of the flood. So in two places, the Quran swears that the floodwaters emanate from an oven, like a cooking oven.
Wow.
And I've got the passages there. And I'll quote one of them. So it says, Surah 11, verses 40 through 44. So this is Allah talking. Build an ark under our watchful eyes, according to our bidding. And he, Noah, built an ark. And when which is, Allah's pronouns are all over the place. So, and when our will was done and water welled up from the oven, we said to Noah, take into the ark a pair from every species, your tribe, except for those already doomed, and all the true believers. So the key words there are tanur, oven. That's what it comes out of. That's a tanur. It's a cooking oven. You can see them cooking bread in it right there.
Right.
So I'm trying to picture the world being inundated from an oven. You know what I mean? So I just picture the water spouting out, and how long it would take to cover the earth and floodwaters that came out of that. It's almost a little comical. You're kind of like, it almost sounds cartoonish. But remember, the Quran is totally permeated with celestial mythology. Muhammad swore that the Quran was based on a celestial tablet kept in heaven, and I give you the passages there. And when he was trying to convert the pagan Arabs, he was often confronted by doubters that were saying that what he was saying was asatir, which is myths of the ancients, and I think about 10 different passages. And you see vestiges of this celestial mythology in the Quran. So you got, in chapter 53, it's called Al-Nijm, the star. Chapter 54, Al-Qamar, the moon. Chapter 85 is Al-Buruj, the zodiac. Chapter 91, Al-Shams, the sun. Think of the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And so imagine if it was named, the star, the moon, the zodiac, the sun. Like, it's unmistakable. And what it appears to be based on, at least according to what my theory is, that the Arc constellation, it's also, because of its shape, it's also the cuneiform word for Sumerian logogram for box or chest. And it also functions as the verb carrying floodwaters. So you have this box that is also carrying floodwaters. And another way to write box, a synonym for it, is with that sign below the Aku sign, you see sheed. And that sheed sign, which also means box, can be read gear, and gear is the word for oven. So you get the word, all these words are encoded in the word for the ark. It's the oven carries floodwaters. And I'm suggesting that that's the reason that the Islamic version of the flood story states that floodwaters emanated from an oven, And I just wanted to sort of segue into the last segment of the presentation. I was going to say, I'd like to point your viewers to Noah. I think we can find him. So if you look in the tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, so you have Enlil. Enlil is embedded in the constellation Boötes, our herdsman constellation. So this is right after the flood, right? So he says, in the past, the flood hero, Utnapishtim, was one of mankind, but now Utnapishtim and his woman shall be like gods, like us gods, right? Utnapishtim shall dwell far away at the mouth of the rivers. So they took me and they settled me far away at the mouth of the rivers. So my theory is we're going to find the flood hero standing for all eternity at the mouth of the rivers. And you're like, well, that sounds a little, little too tangible there. You're getting a little too concrete. Well, the words literally say, it says, Inapi idmish, which just means, like I said, at the opening of the rivers or at the mouth of the rivers, right? Again, if you look at the picture on the left there, you have the Pegasus square, right? That's the Arc constellation. It's straddled by Pisces, okay? And then just to the east or to the left of Pisces is Aries. It's a hired worker constellation, but the abbreviated title is Lu, which means man, which can also be read as, Ram, which is how Aries occurred. An abbreviated form of that title is Hunga, which is the hired worker. And Hunga also stands for the verb to rest or resting. So when you translate, and it's the word nuahu, that's what it means. And when you translate nuahu into Hebrew, you get nuach. That U at the end is just a case ending. So it's just nuach. That's Noah.
And that's why in Arabic his name is N-U, Nu.
Nuh. Yeah, Nuh.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so you end up with Noah, the guy named Resting, standing. That's what I should have added earlier. So Pisces, northern fish, in astrological text is called the Tigris River. And the southern Pisces fish is referred to as the Euphrates. So you have a guy named Resting, or Noah, standing at the mouth of the river's constellation in the body of Aries. So that's kind of what I was going to wrap it up with.
Sure.
So what I want to leave with your viewers is you can actually see Noah's Ark today. And it's ironic to me that everybody has been digging in the dirt looking for Noah's Ark and climbing Mount Ararat when all you had to do is look up in the stars to find Noah's Ark.
Right, right.
And I found that very interesting. So anyway, if your viewers are interested in that, I just restated it right there that you got Noah standing at the mouth of the river's constellation, which is right next to the Ark constellation that we call the Pegasus Square. If you enjoyed that, you might enjoy the Celestial Code of Scripture, the Astral Cipher, underlying the miracle stories of the Bible and the Qur'an. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that with the viewers. I have a great passion for archaeoastronomy, especially as it can be found in the Bible and the Qur'an. And I always joke, I was raised devoutly Roman Catholic, and one of the things I love about that is if you're Catholic, you're pagan, you just don't know it, and that's kind of fun. And when I go to church, I know the pagan symbolism that's embedded under all of the iconography at a mass, and I feel very druidic, if you will.
Yeah. Which I think, to be honest, I think that's a strong suit for Catholicism. Yeah. I think that's what makes Catholicism better than other Christianities.
And
it has that vibe about it. It's like it's a Roman thing. You know what I mean? It's like
it's pagan, man. It's
the Roman Church within it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I hope that your viewers enjoyed that. And again, if they ever have any questions, they can send them my way. I'd be honored. I hope if you think you enjoy that, I go into more depth in the book. That every one of the chapters in the book is going to segue into its own sequel book focused on just that one miracle: Noah's flood, the Garden of Eden, Jesus' celestial sea walk. So anyway, I go into more depth in future books, but I do go into far more depth in chapter 8 of the Celestial Code of Scripture. So I just want to thank you so much for letting me be on the Gnostic Informant. I love this program.
Thanks for coming on.
Great guests.
Yeah, you are one of them. Thanks for coming on. We're gonna do this again soon, and let's see what you got in store for us next time.
All right, that sounds great, Neil. Thank you so much.
All right, and like I always say, you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over